Before I introduce Professor Beita, want to, a couple of reminders. Turn off your cell phones. If anybody here is looking for AIA or CES credit, you have to sign in outside, although it looks like a student population in here tonight, which is actually great to see, right? Because that sort of lets all of us know the impact that Professor Beita has had on our school. Tonight's event is the second of our lectures over the spring series. We have a couple of lectures coming up. There's a card that you can pick up outside. April 1st, there's one at the D. Seversky Center in Old Westbury that's sponsored by the Friends of NYIT Architecture. And then on April 10th at Steelcase, there's a lecture by Odile Deck coming over from France. And finally, at the right in this building, on April 17th, there's a lecture by Michael Mays who's going to talk about glass facades and architecture. So we have a really interesting mix this year. And of course, as always, I'd like to thank Jennifer Mitchell for organizing the event tonight. And as I've already said a couple of times, I'd like to thank Esteban Beita not only for lecturing to us tonight, but for being part of our faculty. As I think as all of you know, he's been a huge contributor in the first and second year curriculum and in the visualization curriculum. And he's really had a big impact. And so it's very exciting to be able to introduce him tonight. You guys have the bio on your chairs, and I'm not going to go through it, but I should actually be calling him Dr. Beita. And please come up.
All right. Thank you, Matthias. Thank you, Matthias. So I'm glad to see all these current students, former students. So some of them are now in design 2, some are even thesis now. So definitely it's been here a while now since I've been teaching here. But it's great to see all these range of students, and I'm glad that everyone's here to see this lecture. Japanese design is very hard to cover in a very short time, so everything I'm doing here is very much compressed to about an hour, maybe less than an hour. But I'll go through key ideas of design, principles, and some idea of a Teahouse design, where it's all implemented in design, in architecture. So let's see if I can get started. Okay. So the first thing we look at here is these 5 elements here. These are the 5 key elements that will define Japanese architecture. The first one is frame views. So if you look at any Japanese space, somehow everything is always framing something. The outside, the inside, a garden, a mountainscape. Second is the idea of shake. It is a Chinese character that's used in Japanese architecture, which means borrowed scenery. This means that a landscape is mixed with a much farther landscape. It could be a mountain, a distant landscape. So you combine a faraway landscape with a very small landscape in your area. It could be a small garden. So that's why it's called borrowed scenery. Third one is flexible spaces. The idea of shoji, which is those semi-transparent paper panels that you can slide, you can take them off, you can move them. And Fusuma is the same panel, but they're just a much thicker paper. They're not transparent. But again, they're both, you can slide them off and take them on. And you can change them from spring to summer to winter. So it makes the space very flexible. Everything has very deep eaves. And that's because Japan is very hot. It has 4 seasons, but the summer is the most intense season. It gets extremely humid, 90 degrees with 100% humidity. So deep eaves provide very long shadows and keep the space cool, in the summer. And last is the idea of obscure views. So obscure views is the idea that you can't tell where something starts and when it ends. So from inside to outside, it's a little blurry as to where things end and where they start. So the idea is things are left unfinished. And because they're unfinished, then you can imagine, you can expand the boundaries. You can see a space that's bigger, even though it could be much smaller. So I'm going to go through, I have a lot of slides, but there are a lot of visual things, so that's why I put many. I want to go through a couple of examples of what are frame views. These are things that I went to and I documented. So during a period of 7 years, I went to about 130 different temples, shrines, tea houses, pavilions, castles, dwellings. So I documented all types of Japanese architecture. And every time trying to document how it frames the view, how the space changed from 4 seasons, So I would go to one space 4 times, spring, summer, autumn, winter, and photograph it to see how the space adapted to every season, how the views change. Because the landscape will change depending every season. In summer, you might have the flowers that are very low to the ground. In spring, you have the sakura trees, the cherry blossoms, that are much higher, so the view will change. In winter, you go back to the snow. In autumn, you get the actual leaves of the trees that are very bright orange and red. So the view will change depending on the season. So these are all typical frame views. In this case, it's very direct. You have a very strong frame, painted black. You get a very almost like a picturesque view. This one is called a kato mado. It's a window that's based on a flower shape. So that's why above here has a much more ornate decoration. But when you look through it, it makes a very picture frame view of the outside. So it makes that view much more intense and much more direct. So you can't just go and view this anywhere. You have to go there, stand in the middle, and the views are very much directed. It tells you whoever was there, you tell them where to view the space perfectly, because all the environment is designed according to that certain perspective. So the inside and the outside are designed together to get the best view. This is a view through a round window. This is in autumn. Same view in summer. So I went there twice. You see how from autumn, it changes very drastically from the colors to the very green of the summer. Same window. This is in spring. You can see a bit more of the colors of the flowers. And then the same view in winter of this space. So, and in front of this, you have a very small table, some decoration. So this part is part of your, let's say, living room. So, looking at this is almost like looking at a painting. Something that it's always natural, it's always changing, it's always perfect. And then you have these two doors here that are shoji that you can open and close to further, control the view. You can make a very vertical view. You can open up everything, have a nice circular view of the outside. This is a very direct view of the outside. Everything's very open, so you can see how things almost blend together, the inside, the outside. These are structure elements. The columns are placed so that they resemble these bamboo structure in the outside. So once you look in from the inside, all these layers and repetition start to mix together, and it makes the view much more expansive. It makes the depth much more stronger, and you can really feel part of the outside. Another view here of this space. This is during summer, so there's very, very little color. In spring, these bushes become completely red, so the view really changes drastically. This is more towards autumn, so you can see more of the coloring here, but it's the same view from summer to autumn, so you see how the colors really change. This is in winter, so there's very bare trees, but then the lighting changes, so there's a much more stronger shadows inside, stronger light, and typically you will add these red carpets to the space. And it kind of tells you where to sit, so you can go to sit. It's a much nicer texture. It's also red, so when the light hits it, it makes the whole interior space a very reddish tone. So it adds to the environment and to the atmosphere, which is much soothing by having all these oranges and red colors. This is the approach to a temple. So even as you approach the space, you still create a frame view of the space even before you get there. So it's raised off the ground, a very perfect square temple. Before you get there, everything's very dark, and then the frame is very strong. You see the light behind the space. And once you pass, this frame, as you get closer, you get a much more direct view of the inside. So it's really the approach becomes a view of the inside, and little by little you get shown different views of the space. So it could be a major view, a secondary view. The idea is to build the progression to a main view. So you could start with a very obscure view of something, go to a much more detail, and then finish off with a grand view of a landscape, or it could be an old tree or a beautiful landscape. In this case, this is a pine tree that's about 1,000 years old. So it's been here. The temple's been here, most of that time. So this is a picture frame view where this thing is completely open. If you want, you can see here this rail. So in winter, if it gets very cold, you can put panels there to make that whole space much more warmer, or if you need to close it up. But again, if you want, you can take everything off, and it completely becomes open. You can't tell what's inside or what's outside. Also, when I went to these spaces, I typically use a fish eye lens, and that's because all these spaces are typically very small, so it's very hard to capture in a lens. If it's 24 millimeters, it's still too narrow. So a fish eye lens, I can see the entire space. I can see 180 degrees on both sides of my lens. So this can really capture the essence of the space, and I can capture the entire view of this space. This is a rest stop, so even as you move through a passageway, even the rest stop has a very strong, frame view of the outside. Again, the idea of light and shadow are very strong in Japanese architecture. It's very dark because of the very long eaves, so you get very strong shadows inside and get a very strong contrast to the outside. So whatever's the outside, in this case a cherry tree, becomes the highlight of the space. So it becomes iconic. It becomes a centerpiece of everything. And from inside, it kind of glows because of the changing in dark and shadow colors. In this temple, it's very simple. The landscape is just it's just moss. That's all. There's no intricate designs. There's no rock gardens. It's just a simple bare green landscape. But because everything's green, everything has a very green atmosphere, which again makes it very soothing. And if you look at color studies, green is a color that helps you to relax. So a person might go here by themselves, and they might just sit here quietly, and be there half an hour, an hour. Typically, if you go here, they give you some tea, so you can drink some green matcha, maybe a small piece of candy or like a cookie, and you can just enjoy this view. It's peaceful, it's quiet. All you can hear is some birds and maybe crickets, but nothing else. Very quiet, relaxing space. This temple is in the mountainscape, so it's very high in the mountain. But the best view here is in winter because all the the snow falls, and then you get all these multiple frame views of the outside. In this case, the panels you can see here are like shutters. They can open and close very easily, and just making the space open up. Especially once you go to here, from inside to outside, there's really no boundary. That floor just ends, and the outside starts. So that by having that limits in boundaries, you really can feel part that this space just completely extends without any boundaries. Same view, just go into the other direction, but you can see how you get a much more framed view of this here, almost like a painting. This is another garden. The main thing here is this space here, which is called the engawa. It's like a small deck on the outside, which you can walk on, and then the space inside has all the straw mats that you can sit on. And you can see, again, very strong vertical structure that further divide the space. It makes it a very strong frame view. And if you see in those paintings that are very vertical, that have like multiple paintings of landscapes that are typical in Chinese or Korean or Japanese architecture, this is trying to show that idea of that painting in a much more realistic way. So you have the actual landscape that actually changes. But that's kind of where those things come from. Again, you can go there and enjoy the views, and any season is perfect. You will always sit low to the ground. That's because every space is designed according to your eye level. So you're meant to be kneeling down, so your eye level is about here. So the height of the temple, the height of the opening is based on your eye level. So by kneeling down, you get the perfect view or the perfect perspective to be able to see the outside. So I won't spend too much time here, but just these are just different examples of different temples. You can see just the idea of frame views are, they're very strong. Again, same space, winter, summer. See how the space changes drastically. Okay, and then winter. Shake was the idea of borrowed scenery. So that's when you compose a scene of different parts. Most Japanese gardens are very, very small. They're almost like miniature worlds. And that's because land is very expensive in Japan and has always been very limited. So people had to recreate sceneries in very limited space, whether it was their architecture, their landscaping, and a way to expand their garden was to borrow a mountain that's far away, And that's what the idea of shake. So this is a very strong shake idea of the view. The temple is right here, okay? The scene is composed, so this here is a very long hedge, right? And the idea of this hedge is that it hides the horizon plane of the view. That means you can't tell where something ends or where it starts. Afterwards, you compose small landscape elements here that start to give it a scale. It gives it depth, so as you go farther back, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Afterwards, you add trees here. These trees are, again, perfectly straight. They kind of match the structure of the temple. And then behind the trees, you have more landscape. And last, you have this huge mountain. So eventually, once you look at this, there could be a house behind here, but you can't see it because this hedge is hiding that element. So obviously, right now, there's some things here that they're modern, but when it was built, it was just one scene. So by having that hedge, it blends the boundaries, and you really cannot tell what's close, what's far away, and everything becomes just one painting or one scene. You can see here pretty much in detail. Very low elements here. They get higher in the back. A very controlling hedge. The trees are placed perfectly vertical, and then you get a nice view in the back, typically a mountain, or it could be a landscape. So then everything here gets composed almost like a photo montage you would do in Photoshop, but this is actually done by composing actual elements in the landscape. But it's like a it's like a photo montage, I would say, that you can compare it to. That we saw before, same thing. Over here you have a hedge that's behind here, bamboo trees, and then behind there you have mountains. So all these things are overlapped together and compose a scene that you can't tell what's close and what's far away in your element. Also, most gardens are, because they're small, they'll typically, you add a hill, a fake hill towards the back. This way, when you look at it, you can't tell it ends. You can see part of the hill, and then the roof eaves will come down and will cut it. So visually, all you see is the landscape going up, and you can imagine that it could be a mountain. It could be something that keeps going forever, but you can't see it because everything is being cut here into one scene. So the idea is by showing part of the landscape, your imagination can finish the rest. It can make the whole scene complete. This detail here is a typical detail found in Japanese traditional boats. So the idea is once you look at the scene, you can imagine that you were in a boat with a very small wood rails, and you can get that idea of being a bit more close to a different element, in this case, water. So these are just more examples of shake. You can see that they always have a kind of an open space here, medium-sized shrubbery, something higher in the back, and then the final view in the background. So all these layers is what makes the space actually work. In this case, instead of having a hedge, you have a very strong wall, and that breaks up the scene. You can tell where the horizon line ends, and everything gets composed into one scene. When this thing was actually built in the 1600s, this was much lower, so you get a much bigger scene of the mountain. But it's still kind of visible that you have an iconic element here, the mountain, and all these small shrubberies starts to mix the scene. The next part that is very crucial is these panels, whether shoji or fusuma, which if you can see here, all these panels here are flexible. You can take them out, you can change them, and they could be made out of wood, out of straw, out of bamboo, out of paper. The ones here are bamboo, so they allow more air through. The ones here are paper, so they allow light into the space. The ones here are fusuma, so you can take them out, but they're solid, so the paper is very thick, so you really cannot tell the light. But these things, and then this space, for example, right now everything's closed here. But if I were to take away, all these panels, then I could get this here, because you can see here that there's rails here, there's rails here, there's rails here. So you could actually make the space into 1, 2, 3, 4 different rooms if you wanted to. Or you can take everything out, and the whole space becomes a grand scene that you can see the whole landscape. So depending on the use, you can change the function, what things you want to use here. This is a pavilion, so it's called a Funairi Pavilion, which means a space near water. So this space is actually very unique because it's the only space or the only tea room that you actually approach from underneath. So if you were to come here, you would go into a very small boat, go through here, arrive under the tea house, go up the steps, and arrive in this space here. So that's really not very uncommon. It's actually very rare to see in this space. But the good thing here is that this kind of view here, you can modify to whatever you want. Everything here are these semi-transparent panels. Over here, you can add wood panels that will completely enclose the space. These panels here you can close like shutters in this direction. And the ones here are open in a vertical sense. So I could actually, same room, I could open these panels, and I could modify this space endlessly to create whatever I want. You know, I can focus the view to, for example, a bridge here, or the water, or this element here. So I can control what I want to see depending on the season. The next thing is a deep eaves. So these elements here, you know, typically stick out a lot from the building. Again, because of the summers, they're very hot, and they give that extra shadow or that sense of mystery that Japanese is famous for. You know, the idea of mystery of light and shadow, and you know, these things extend past this outdoor space. So you can see that because of these eaves, you know, the change from light and dark is very drastic in the space, and that's one of the key elements of Japanese, you know, architecture, and what makes these views so strong, because they really stick out and are very bright from the outside. Here you can see, you know, the light in Japanese designs. You know, light and shadow are crucial, and the way they enter the space is very important, because, you know, it makes it that mystery of the space. You know, as light actually goes deeper and deeper, you can see how, you know, it shines up to this point. The room still is here, but at one point it just becomes dark, so you can't see what's happening there. So it makes it very soothing, that space, because of the light. Obscure boundaries is the fifth one, and that's pretty much just the idea of you can't tell what's inside and what's outside. So every space in some way has these elements that you can't tell the outside from the inside. And you can tell pretty much here that, you know, this temple is pretty much right next to this landscape. There's very little boundaries here. You see the space actually, it goes up here, so you really cannot tell the judge's size of the space. In this case, this temple, the actual straw mats just finished. You know, there's no actual boundary. Typically, it will be a wood structural piece here that will hold them in place, but right now they just finished here. So it looks like this straw mat is at the same level as this, when actually it's 3 feet above the ground. So this thing's 3 feet above this space, but you really cannot tell that it is, because of the way it's placed. So if I'm looking straight ahead, it's very hard to tell what's higher or what's low here. Everything just becomes one scene. Same thing here. So this is just other details. So the next, these things just give you a very small highlight into what is Japanese, you know, architecture, and by looking at those 5 principles of design: the obscure boundaries, the idea of shake, the flexible space, light and shadow, the deep eaves of the space. So all these things, what you would typically see in any Japanese space, you know, it makes up the basic design. Then those spaces are typically function the best in tea rooms, tea houses, because these are very small spaces. So because it limits the size, as a person, you can enjoy everything a bit more. So I just want to talk about, I'm going to go over 3 tea houses, one very small, medium-sized, and a large-scale tea house. And that should give you a bit more detail as to how these spaces work. So if I go over it, somebody just, because I'm not keeping time, so I'm not sure how's it going, so let me know. So a tea house, okay, a tea house is a very small space. It's typically attached to a house or a temple, or it could be detached. It could be located on a garden outside the space. They will typically have a small entrance. It could be part of the building, or it could be detached, depending on the type of tea house. These are the 6 typical layouts. Each one of these is is one straw mat, so it should accommodate about 1 person. And the most typical layout is this one here, the one that has 4.5 mats. Typically, this is a small hearth. You can actually have a heated water there. You can heat up your tea, and you can prepare it. Typically, when you go here, you can sit 2 people per each mat, and you can have up to 1.5 to 6. So it really varies depending on the tea house, but typically they're pretty small. The basic design of these spaces are they have an area to prepare the tea. They have a very small tokonoma, which is a space. It's almost like a small shrine. It's typically set back. It might have a scroll, a flower, some sculptural element. And the idea is once you come to this space, a tea master will serve you tea, okay? And when you go here, you don't go to talk about anything. You talk about things that only relate to tea. So if I were to go here, I would discuss maybe about this scroll here, because the scroll will change from season to season. So I will discuss the design, discuss the idea behind the scroll, and it will be a very focused discussion about just those elements. You will also enter through Nijiriguchi, which is a very low opening. So the idea is when you come in, you have to bow down and enter. So what that means is when you enter, everybody's equal. So no matter who comes here, whether it's a regular person, a peasant, a samurai, everybody's equal. So by bending over, the samurai had to take off their sword and leave it outside. So that forced everyone that comes here to be in equal status. So in here, you don't think about class. Everybody's equal in this place. And this is something that's completely into the culture. It's still practiced right now very often. Typical, every house in Japan, whether it's modern, contemporary, will always have a small tea house that's very traditional in their house, somewhere in their space. And they will host tea parties or these things every day. Tea ceremony, it's a whole almost like a religion. Has very strict rules, how you approach it, how you sit, how you hold the utensils, how things are prepared. Everything has a very strong, your posture, all these things are very, takes a long time to learn. It could take 10 years or more. Some things that you can use to prepare tea. Then once you sit, typically the tea master will serve you, he's facing you, and your two guests will, you kind of not, it's very strict, very serious face, you're not really having fun. It's just more like a discussion of very serious elements. The way you prepare tea, it's a whole culture that, once you take the tea, you can't just drink it, You have to hold the cup with two hands like this. Before you drink, you have to turn the cup 3 times. And then once you turn it 3 times, you can drink your tea, but not in one sip. You have to take it in 3.5 sips. 1, 2, 3, and half a sip. And that should be enough to drink your tea. So everything has a very set rules of how to drink or prepare your things. Even afterwards, the way you wash the things is another process. That it's a whole religion of how to wash the utensils afterwards. The first tea room here is called a Taiyan tea room. It was designed by Sen no Rikyu. He's one of the most famous Japanese tea masters. Typically, there's 3. This is one of the smallest tea rooms that exists in Japan. This is from the outside. It's very small. You can accommodate maybe 2 people inside. It's detached from the house, from the temple. Has its own private entrance on this side. It's the smallest tea room in Japan. It's about 63 cubic feet, so it's pretty tiny. And the aesthetics of pretty much tea ceremony is just simplicity. You don't need any decoration. Nothing should be gold. Everything is just as it is. Wood is wood. Straw is straw. There's no need to make anything elaborate. You go there to appreciate things for what they are and to enjoy the natural things in these elements. So this space is typically designed for 2 people. It could vary depending on the tea room. But you will plan all these things. The way you sit, the materials, the openings, the light, the height, ceiling. All these things are meant to make this space a bit more personal. So in this space, you can tell how small it is. Just 2 of these straw mats. You still have that tokonoma, so you have a place that you can place art, and you can discuss about it. The height changes from the guest to the tea master, so the guest feels a bit of a higher space versus the actual tea master that has a much lower ceiling in the space. Even the walls are made out of mud, so you mix mud with straw, and you place it, and that becomes the actual material. So you get the smells of the textures, you get the feeling of the straw, and all these things what really makes the space very natural. The Nijiriguchi, like I mentioned before, is the entrance to the space. So before you enter, the door is down here. So you can't just enter. You have to always lower your head, and this makes it makes everyone equal. It makes you respect the space that you're going to. Okay. So this is the space house. You will come in through here. This door here slides left, and then you will crawl to that door to enter. So you have to get on your knees, crawl inside, and kind of be more humble towards the space. A very small hearth over here, the alcove, which is the tokonoma, 2 mats, And then back here is the place you prepare tea. So you wouldn't see the space unless you're the tea master. So the guests would be limited to just being just here. In these spaces, the views are not important because everything is focused towards the inside. You see all the openings here are above your eye level. They're typically covered in paper, so you can't see the outside. The idea is to bring natural light, some shadows, but the views are not really the idea here. It's more like the outside space. The tokonoma, like I mentioned, is a place that you can hang a scroll. You can put an art piece. You can put a ikebana, those Japanese flower designs. Okay, and I guess it's the same space over here. Okay. This space has only 3 windows. They're called Stajimado, this one here. And Stajimado are these windows over here. These are made up of exposed bamboo. This bamboo is actually the structure of the tea house, so it will continue through here. And afterward, you put plaster over the bamboo to make the floor wall. But here, it's just, it was left exposed. It was like you exposed the actual structure. So it has a very natural feeling to it. It's the actual bamboo, it has the texture, the smells, and everything. And it looks like it was always there. So that's what is a Stajimado. The ceiling is very low, 5'5", so you can't really stand up. You have to always kind of be lower to the ground, either kneel or lower your head. So you shouldn't be able to stand up full height in one of these spaces. Okay. So some of the key things here is the size of the entrance that makes you, go down to the ground, height of the ceiling. It has rounded pillars, and this is more aesthetical elements to make the space more, the touch, much more soothing. Light from the windows, but not views, just the light. This space has a small, like your guests will come here, have like a waiting area before you enter, and then they will proceed to the tea house. So, although this is very small, it still has its own little garden in front of the space. And this is a picture taken with the fisheye lens. So that was the only way to capture the entire space. You can see that all the windows here are not there for views. They're above your head. If they're open, they really do not provide anything. It's just light and shadow. Okay. The next space here is a tea house. Okay, so the first was a tea room. A tea house is a grand space for tea. So let's say guests come to the space, they can go take a break, they can rest, they can enjoy tea in this space. So in this case, unlike the other one, views are the main thing that you show here. Once they're drinking tea, they want to be able to enjoy all these views. You see here that even the landscape here has all these very distinct shapes. From outside, it makes no sense, why they're shaped this way. But once you go inside, then it starts to make more sense. Again, thinking about shake like before, the way these things are shaped. For example, if you see this shape from inside, right? Afterwards, when it's framed with this thing here, you might see this kind of shrubbery coming down, and it looks like the base of a mountain. It's coming down here, it goes up, and then it's cut with the frames of your building. So again, shake, you can see with the shrubbery here, this bush here, the structure. Now it's a lot of tall buildings, but before you could see a vast landscape of elements there. And this diagram kind of explains what is shake in a very simple way. You have the observer that sits over here. He's kneeling down, so his eyesight is pretty much aligned with. So pretty much you can't see what's behind this element here. Next, the boundaries. So the building, whether it's the building's eaves, the bottom of this little terrace space, and then the frame of the building create the boundaries. Next, you have the garden. So you can have very small landscaping here, shrubs, one of these lanterns. Next, you have this key element here. There could be a wall. It could be a long shrub. Behind the wall, you have all the unwanted views. There could be other buildings, other houses. And last, you have the wanted view, a mountain somewhere in the distance. So once all these things are combined together, then you get the full scene of the space that is composed under one scene. One second. So that was a tea room, a tea house. And this idea is, it's used in almost all architecture, whether it's a large scale, small scale. The next space is called a NYIT Pavilion. And before I mentioned, it's called almost like the tea house approached by water. Again, it's very rare to see a space that is in this design. It's located in It's called the Hankaku Pavilion right here, which means floating clouds. And that's because the space has these shapes that are very curvy here. So it looks like a cloud space. So the whole building is called Floating Clouds Pavilion, but the actual tea house is just right here. So this space is the tea house here. And you will come through here, take a small boat, just cross 10 feet, and then get here. You would dock the boat, go up the staircase, and you will come beneath the tea room into your space. And that's the only space that actually does it in Japan. That's why it's very unique. I think it took me 3 years to get permission to get to this space. And then I was able to actually photograph it and document it. This is the whole space, but the actual tea room is just right here, this here. You see this here is the entrance, the stairs, and you have small space on both sides to have your, to enjoy views, to have a tea party, or such things. So in this case, all the panels are closed completely. This one, I open up the bottom panels here, and the third one, I mix these ones here. But technically, you could remove anything you want. You can move this right, you can move it left, you can take it out, you can change it to another one. So it's pretty much endless as to what you can show in this space. So this very simple space can transform into an unlimited number of views. You can pretty much decide where to view. You want to see just the water, you want to see the top, you want to see just one little piece of the landscape. And that's why when you go from spring to summer to winter, every season has something unique, whether it's a cherry blossom tree, the autumn of the trees. So you can really define where to see or where to give attention to your space. Okay. And the last space is called Bosen Tea Room. Thank you. So I based my doctorate on this space. So I spent 3 years documenting this tea room, which took me about 4 years to get permission to enter. That's the most difficult one to enter. After making like unlimited numbers of letters, getting permissions, getting recommendations from Japanese architects. This is designed by, where we go. It's called Bosen Tea Room. So it's pretty much, the name is very obscured. So every name is not really, the meaning, if you translate it, it won't be the same. So everything's, again, is very philosophical, almost like Zen. So it's really up to each person to see it. It's made up of 2 kanji. So, each kanji or Japanese character have multiple meanings. So, depending how they're placed together, can mean different elements. It was designed by Kobori Enshu, which is another very famous Japanese tea master. This tea room, because it's so famous, it's a national treasure. I could enter, I could photograph, but I couldn't do any long-time research. So what I did here is I took down all the measurements of everything, the landscape, the inside, and I made a 3D model of the space. This is the 3D model. So pretty much everything's done according to the actual building, the materials, the lighting. I modeled every piece of stone outside, every landscape element. So so I could actually experiment in this space. This space is very famous for the light, but I couldn't be there from morning to evening. It's impossible to just be in that space. So by making this 3D model, I could actually make several animations from morning to evening, let it run, and see how the light enters the space during every season, and how pretty much I can then test out how all these panels work. So what if I take away the panel? What if I put more layers of panels? What if I remove something else? And see how this space can transform in the space. What's unique about this tea room is that the tea master, he grew up near a lake in Japan. But when he retired very far away from the lake in a very different part of Japan. But he wanted to bring back the idea of being near water. So how do you create space that's near water, although there's no water around this space? So he did all these little details to, so once you're inside, you feel that you actually belong, you're actually near a lake somewhere. The first thing he did was, first of all, he grew up near Lake Biwa in Japan. This is a painting of Lake Biwa. So this is Japan's largest lake. This is the temple. So you would approach from here. You would cross the stone bridge, go through here, enter here. Again, depending of your status, if you go straight here to the second gate, you're a very high status. If you go here, turn right, lower status. So even the approach really depends on your on who you are. But you see here, this garden is called the Garden of the 8 Views. So 8 views, and that comes from Lake Biwa. Lake Biwa is famous for the 8 views of Lake Biwa. So he tried to recreate these famous views that are shown in these paintings into his design. So these are all different views of the lake. So the gardening he made would try to capture the idea of those views in his design. Are very abstract, but small key things are there. The garden is let's see, the street is where's the street? The street is over here. You come through here, you turn. So the garden is just here. So the tea room is over here. So this is the actual garden of the space. So when I went here, I went this path here. I would turn around here. I can, and just this orange part is just the tea house. The rest are, there's other spaces, living quarters, but we're only going to focus on this little tea house here. In the plan of the space, the tea house is unique because of the layers. Back here is where you will have the tea master sitting. Second layer is where you have your guests. And third layer is an in-between space. It's almost like a wood deck. It has a very unique type of Japanese panel that is called a floating shoji. And that's because it's hanging from the roof. It's the only space that actually has that space, and what makes this thing unique. If you see the section, you'll be sitting here, a small garden, a very clear shrub that again defines the space, and that makes the space more obscured. You can't tell what's what things you're looking at. From the outside of the space, the main temple, everything is gold, right? All these details, very high ceilings, very bright. So, but once you enter the space, everything changes because the space goes back to being very neutral. You're there just to enjoy the views. You enjoy the space, and you're there to relax. So there's no more elegant elements here. There's no more gold, no more elegant paintings over here. Everything's simple. Straw mats, simply painted, straw mixed with dirt, the plaster, and very simple roof. So that's the entire space. This picture is taken from the point of view of the tea master. So the tea master would sit here, and he would get because actually, may go back. Most tea houses are there for the guests. This house is for the tea master. This is his personal tea house, so he gets the best view of everything. So he sits here, and then he looks through here to the outside. The first thing you see here is he painted some mountains here. These mountains are based on his his childhood mountain, Lake Biwa. Next, you might see here this small railing here. And this railing is based on a Japanese boat railing from where he grew up. Afterwards, the view is very cropped. It's controlled. This is called hanging shoji. So you can only see the bottom part of the scene. You can't see the top. So it further controls the view and gives you a frame view of the bottom of the landscape here. So from inside the space, he actually gets two views. He makes a second frame view here into other mountains that are painted here. He gets the main view here towards the garden. So he gets all these scenes of almost being, back home, for example. This is the key view of the space. So you see that it's framed towards the bottom. It has a water basin that we'll discuss soon. Even the stones here are very glossy black stones. So if you pour water on the stones, it's going to look like shimmering. So imagine like the light hits it, almost like the beachfront of a lake. You get all the stones, and it also reflects light from here, will bounce off into the space here. So it brings back the idea of being near water. So this in-between space is where you have this kind of floating shoji here. So you enter here. Although it's a very large space, it's still like before. You still have to lower your head before you enter, although it's much bigger. So it has the same idea of the approach to the entrance, but at a much larger scale. Also, you can see the layers here. You have the main layer here of panels, second layer of panels, and if you need to, you can add a third layer outside. This is in summer, so in summer it's very intense heat. You can add these bamboo straw panels, and you can further filter the light that enters the space. So it can become very bright or very dark just by adding more layers of panels here. You can see here the stone. In this case, they added water, so it looks like the shore. You can see here the detail of the railing, almost like a boat railing. This is the hedge that is on the other side. So this is actually what blocks the view. It limits what you can see to the outside. This is the 3D model of this space here, but you can see I would sit here and I will look at an angle towards this space here. These doors here go to a back room where you prepare tea, so you're not meant to go there. In between space, and then this water basin in front here. The water basin is one of the most crucial points in this space, because the idea of water, how best do you get water into your space? You know, when light hits water, you get the water ripples, right? And those things actually reflect inside, and they could actually be a very nice iconic element. In this space, I read that you could see water ripples in summer, but it was never documented. You know, it would say in text that you can see it during summer, but it wouldn't say when you will see it. No one's taken a picture of it, so I tried to make a 3D model to see if I could prove that you can get water ripples here, and then I could try to figure out when it's done and during what season. So again, for this I used the 3D model. I'll show you in 1 second here. This is a view of the panels, but you can see how this panel, again, you can close everything, you can open everything, you can close partially. You can kind of create your own view of the outside. This is a view of the 3D model from inside. So in this way, 3D model, I took different shots, different renderings. Each time I took something out, landscaping, change the panels, open up things inside, take away all the panels, take away everything, or close everything. So by doing a 3D model, I could capture the essence and the light of how this space can change and adapt, by having different layers of panels. Same thing here, everything done with the fisheye lens in 3D Max. And you can see how the light changes from every condition, from very bright with everything open, very dark with everything enclosed, and how you can transform this space simply by changing the different panels. This, I don't know how much have I spoken already? Okay? Yeah? Okay. This one here, this is a view of the TMS under different elements. In this case, no shading, 1 layer of shading, 2 layers. You can see how the space will change and become darker by simply adding more layers here. The idea of the entrance, the person has to always lean over or go on your knees before you get into the space. So whether it's a very small space here or a very long space, the idea is the same. This picture frame window is what's unique about this space. You're limited to looking only down here of the space. And you can see that, this area here, that you can see the stone, the railing here, a blank space over here that kind of makes that gap where your eye can actually go from here and jump here. So every landscape garden, whether it's water, a rock garden, or sand, will always have a blank space. And that blank space allows your eye to move from point to point in the, in the space. Another view of the space. These panels also, what's unique here is that in winter, when it gets very dark, it's very little light, if light hits any of these panels, the whole panel becomes a lantern, because the whole light gets transferred to this paper. So it can actually bring extra light into the space. Okay, the next thing is the water. Okay, so by having the railings that resemble a boat railing, the painted mountains, the garden design, water ripples, and your imagination, that's what creates the view. All these things only give you hints of water. They don't show you the water. The main part here is the person, the guest is coming here, and his imagination. He's got to take down all those clues, and he's got to rebuild the scene himself. So this thing wouldn't work without the person being there. And every person will bring their own personal experience and will make the view very personal. That's why everything's very simple, no details, so that each person can make it their own space. These are just some renderings of the space. Okay, that we saw before. The water basin. This water basin is typically used for when you enter, you wash your hands just to cleanse yourself. But even more important is, this is the 3D rendering that I made. But here I could show that at one time during the year, the light hits the water basin, it reflects inside, and while sitting in this space, you can see water ripples into this space here. And that, that took me like a year to figure out, but eventually I got the correct setting. I figured out the correct date and time that this will work in the space. So at one point, the water hits here, has to be the correct angle, somewhere between late June, only in summer. You get the correct angle that actually will hit here, the light will bounce off, and you get maybe an hour of water ripples, and then it stops until next year. So I did all these calculations. I figured out during each season, spring, summer, autumn, winter. In spring, the water ripples happen only in the outside, so they never actually enter the space. In summer, during this time here, they actually enter the space. In autumn, they limit it to the outside of the space, and in winter, there's pretty much no water ripples. I won't go into too much detail, just a lot of research, but I could figure out exactly where they happen, at what times, and during the year. So your imagination is a key factor in the space. These are renderings of the space from the 3D model. It was done in 3D Max, also a rendering. This is a night rendering of the space. You can see how the light glimmers in the space. So even at night, by putting simple lanterns here, you can get that idea of the shimmering water effect outside the space. So these are also renderings. Okay. So this is more like details of construction. There's one saying in Japan: if you build a house or temple, always build it for summer, because that's the key design. So it was this Japanese Kenko Yoshida said that when you build a house, build it for summer. That's kind of a key factor in Japan. Winters are very, they're very cold, but summer is still the most drastic season. Hot, humid, very uncomfortable. So I mean, pretty much this is that template that we just saw. But the whole space works, to make the space cooler. It's raised off the ground, so the air can actually ventilate through here, right? Typically, as a garden, there could be a water, it could be rocks, but once you throw water, the water evaporates and makes that cycle of ventilation. Has a small window in the back, so again, it promotes ventilation from the outside to the inside. The floor is made out of straw mats, which are breathing material. That means that the air can filter through it and go through every space, so the air can escape. The deep eaves have openings here that allow air to actually enter the space, and so there are all these things that make the space cooler and made for summer. In winter, if it gets cold, what you can do is you take away those panels that are paper and you put ones that are made out of wood, which are much thicker. So that starts to insulate the space even more. Shoji, the panels here, they control the views that we covered before. You can change the size, the materials, the designs. So this is a very typical type of material. The most basic one, shoji. It's just wood, very wood dowels, and a piece of paper. This paper could be very thick, very thin. You can control how much light you want to enter the space. So it's really some are made out of oil that allows it to last a bit longer. But typically, because it's paper, if you touch it, it breaks right away. So every year you have to replace it. And with kids, it's impossible. Everything will be destroyed in 2 seconds. So this is akari shoji. It means akari means it means light in Japanese. So it's a light door. So very lightweight. Very makes a very nice ambient light. This one here, same panel, but in this case, the panels below you can move vertically up and down. So in this case, you start to show a view towards the bottom. And this one's called Yukimi Shoji, which means snow viewing space or snow viewing window, because you can only see the bottom of the space here. So whether it's snowing, it's raining, it's autumn, you can always feel the atmosphere because you can always see what's happening by just looking at what's on the ground. Flowers, snow, autumn. So again, another way to control the view to the outside. And by looking towards the bottom, you can't see above your space. So it means you can't tell if your garden is very small or very big. Because there could be, actually there's a wall right there, but you can't tell these things because you're limited as to where you can see the space. This is a Yoshi Shoji. This is made out of just bamboo. So in summer, these work great. Air still passes through here. It controls insects. Ventilation works great. So you can replace these panels throughout the year. So they're very flexible. So again, this was a very small introduction to Japanese design, some tea houses, spaces. I'll finish off with some contemporary spaces, just two of them, by Kengo Kuma. And I put him because I work for him in Japan, and he's one of the one that works most closely with Japanese traditional idea in a very contemporary way. This space that I love is called the Forest House. Okay, the house is very contemporary. Everything's white, glass, metal. But from inside, you start to get all these Japanese ideas. I don't know if you can see, especially through here, the way things just end without any borders. This kind of endless space. Again, it's raised off the ground, and that's because you want to hide, what's around the building. You want to change the viewpoint of the space. You still see all these kind of small elements, these details. Right now they're metal, but before they were bamboo or other small details. Very large windows, very large eaves. So they still frame the view by having all these things that are vertical and horizontal. From inside, the approach, Again, all these things are metal, but they still have that repetition of elements of Japanese design. The doors are still, you really have very little frame, so it feels completely transparent. This is glass here, but you can't tell where the glass ends or where it starts. It's completely built into the actual ground here. So you have a very nice detail to hide those elements. From the inside, the living room, you can't tell, again, this building is off the ground about 10 feet, but you can't tell if the ground is below, same level, or above. So by having no boundaries here or no borders, it goes back to the straw mats of kind of not knowing where you are. So everything kind of blends together. So again, the floor just ends here. You have glass, you can't tell, and then it just continues into the vast landscape. The bedroom again, very clear glass. Everything's glass here. The floor just ends. There's no frame. Everything's just open. And again, this person has his own private forest, so there's nobody there to see anything. So it's very, but you can tell those details that go back to being Japanese architecture. This space is a lot bigger. It's a Ginsan Onsen. So do you know what an onsen is? It's like a Japanese bathhouse. Like all these different, water, hot, cold, This used to be a very traditional one, but he was commissioned to redesign it and make it more up-to-date. So here he was trying to mix traditional and contemporary design into one element. The approach, the inside, you can see that repetition, which is very traditional Japanese, vertical elements, small details here of, these are actually bamboo pieces. You have glass here that is, the glass is not transparent. It has almost like it looks like old glass from 1930s, like very rough finish, kind of bubbles inside, almost like a stained window. So that goes back to having that the paper doors that you can't see through it. You can see only pretty much the light and an obscure view of the outside. From the inside, this is the main lobby space of the entrance. You put lights here to enhance the space. But you can see all the layers, right, of things that are kind of transparent, that hide the staircase, all these vertical elements. Everything's still very simple. Again, at nighttime. And you can see, even in this view, all these walls here are simple, and everything is layering space. By adding different layers, you try to you make the space bigger. It feels more expansive. These walls are made out of paper, so it goes back to the paper shoji, or those panels. Here again is paper, but it's more a more contemporary design of the panels. Materials are just stone, wood, and black, a painted area. You see here that they kept the actual structure of the building, and they mixed it with a new structure, and everything below this is completely new. So very little furniture because Japanese very simple. It's just a bed. In this case, it has a mattress. Typically, you wouldn't have a mattress. You have a futon that you roll over, and you put it in your closet, and you take it out at night. This is more like you have a lot of foreigners coming here, so it has to be more westernized to make them more comfortable. Staircase. And it's one of the private bathrooms or showers. Well, there's no showers. Mostly you bath in one of these spaces. Typically you will never shower. You always have this in your house, and you can go there. You can soak in and wash yourself. Almost no one has a shower that they use typically. Or they have one, but they don't use it. And yeah, pretty much as an introduction to Japanese. Thank you. So if you have questions, please. No questions? Too much? Okay. All right, so one question. All right.
Can you talk a little bit about how you ended up in Japan?
Okay. When I first came to school, I started at NYIT, and I would always go to the Japan Society. It's on, I think, on 40th Street by the UN building. I saw there, I think, 3 or 4 Japanese architects that would give lectures, and somehow, after seeing their work, I became very motivated to go to Japan. From that point, I set my goal that I had to get there somehow, and I ended up in Japan. From here, I went to Costa Rica for a few years to work, and then I got a Japanese scholarship, the Mobusho Kugakusho scholarship, and they gave me a full scholarship to Japan for 6 years. And that's where I ended up in for the next 7 years in Japan. But since my first day of school, I've always into Japanese architecture. Either I saw a book at some point in my life that somehow got me motivated, but I was very strict that I had to get there somehow in school. And yeah. So very focused on my studies. You know, I could have never, I was kind of went through my whole education pretty, took me 10 years, but I was working and studying at the same time, so I was mixing both things, all these elements. Okay. Yes?
Is it hard to make the transition with the cultural differences and the language barrier?
Not really. I mean, once you got there, I took like a 6-month intense course in Japanese, and that got through pretty, Japan is great, you know, I love Tokyo, and I never had any problem with the cultures.
Is it a hard language to learn?
Yes. Yes. But I mean, I'm very good at cultures. You know, I lived in Russia before. I lived in Central America, and I'm always pretty comfortable in any culture. It depends, I guess, who you are. But for me, it's fine to live anywhere. Yeah. I lived in Vladivostok. Yeah.
Learn Russian? Learn Russian?
I can't. Yeah. My wife is Russian, but it's very, very hard to learn. Yeah. I already gave up a long time ago. Yeah. Yeah. That's too difficult. Yes.
You said in the 3D model that the view was not perpendicular to where the viewer was seated. Was
Yes.
there a reason for that?
Well, pretty much the view on the outside, the tea master will design the view. So you know, that view is meant to be seen only by one angle. So depending on the tea master, he might say that you have to see it straight on or at an angle. And this way, if it's at an angle, you're going to see more layers of the space seen through the view. But if I go there and just walk around, I might see the view, but I won't get the whole experience unless I go to the correct spot to see it. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, you guys seem pretty tired. I know you've been here since I mean, this morning I had design too with some of you guys, so you've been here the whole day, so I'm glad that you're still here.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, could you just maybe comment on the collaborative process between architect and contractor in Japan, maybe, as opposed to in the States? From what I understand, it's much more cooperation or synergy between contractor.
Much more, yeah. I mean,
yeah, and in the States,
in
you're
Japan,
almost
it's,
an adversary.
everything's perfection.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a status of, you know, who's higher, who's lower. It's very important in Japan. Even the way you call a person, if you're older, you automatically, you know, have a higher status. And that means that you cannot talk back to him. You have to do pretty much everything he says. You cannot, you know, you have to respect him. Same thing, the architect is higher, the builder is lower. So that way you, you know, whatever you do, you know, drawings, they will do exactly to the perfection. You know, if they make a mistake, they redo it again. But it's something that, you know, if you tell them to redo it, they'll come and, you know, they'll bow, say sorry, and they'll redo it. You know, but the communication is, you know, everything you say is taken to the word. You know, there's never any mistakes. Whatever you ask, you will get. You know, no one's gonna try and cheat you for materials or give you a lower estimate. Everything's straightforward to whatever you want. So that part is quite good, I guess.
Thank you.
In building, yes. Yeah. Anyone here been to Japan? No? Couple? A lot, actually. Good. All right. Yes.
I think that Japanese architecture is so fantastically detailed,
Yes.
and there's such a wonderful response to the intricacies and the perfection of it. But I'll tell you that my visit to Japan, I was totally dismayed at cities, what cities look like.
Of course, yeah.
And when I told a friend of mine that, he said, "Oh, they can do a radish, but they can't do a city. Design a radish."
That's true, yeah.
is what he
In
meant.
Japan, cities like Tokyo or Osaka, any major city, there's very limited codes for building. So the problem is you could do whatever you want, wherever you want. So you can have a very historical building next to a thing that looks like a robot. That happens all the time. And you know, as long as the building has fire stairs, elevators, and meters-wise, you can do whatever you want. There's no restriction. And the problem with that is, you know, things that don't match. You know, you have a temple, a skyscraper next door, a tea house here, so these things don't match. Or another problem that you might have is that in the U.S., every city is distinct. You know, I can tell that I'm in New York by just being outside. In Japan, if you go to Tokyo, Osaka, and you get out the train or the bus, it feels the same. You know, the buildings are the same design, same scale. So it's one thing that it's not really distinction between city and city is very much the same from, you know, from those spaces. So I agree with those things. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, June.
It's my first question. When you studied Japan,
Yeah.
did you find a difference between Japanese architecture compared to Chinese architecture, so also compared to Korean architecture? Did you get to learn all of these differences, or was it just focused on Japanese architecture?
Mine was focused on Japanese architecture, yeah. Chinese and Korean is a little similar, but it's still quite different. Koreans have more like the courthouse designs in the space. So, I mean, I would like, that could be my next you know, process to analyze Korean architecture. So. Yeah, if I want to keep going. Yeah. Okay. All right, yeah, thank you very much, guys. Thank you.